hopefully guide you through some more of our Arcadian adventures. Today, what I want to discuss with you is I want to jump into the fundamentals of using Bootstrap and understanding the underlying HTML inherent to it. The first thing I want to talk about is the grid system. So this class is going to go very deep, or will skim the surface. I wouldn't say very deep into the idea of the grid system with Bootstrap. If you want to follow along, I would use the Bootstrap Docs 5.2 layouts grid documentation to give you more information on how to follow along, because I will be using some of the code that you find here and give you some ideas of how that works for you moving forward, especially when you're trying to create a tabular structure with your HTML. Now, if you've developed HTML in any form or fashion, you'll know that tabular development is very important. Understanding how the code sits in stasis or sits inside of your browser is very important. Your browser window is very important. Now, the problem with tables in HTML is that they're extremely strict, meaning that it's very difficult to apply specific stylings such as margins or paddings the way you would like to when you are using tables from an HTML perspective. So you might be asking, well, if that's true, don't Bootstrap tables work the same? Well, they don't. And I will tell you that Bootstrap doesn't necessarily have tables. So if I went a little deeper into this and I said, okay, well, let's go ahead and take a code example, right? I'm using a new file called grid.html, and I'm going to build tables, right? So we'll say table, t head, and then I'll say t body, and then in my t body I'll have my rows and my cells, right? I am a cell. And I can have multiple cells if I want. I can even put other HTML elements in cells. We'll call this index, we'll say, oops, I didn't mean to do that. We'll say, I do not want to do what I'm doing right now. There we go. We will say, I am a link. We'll say href, and then we will try to get back to index.html. And then what I will also do is I will give this table borders, so border equals 1. And I'm not going to use CSS styles in this respect. All I'm going to do is get the table to render. I'm going to run it. Obviously, it's not going to run right because it's going to go straight to the home page, which is index.html. So I have another page that is pointing to the grid.html. Just for your situational awareness, if you are in REPL and you create another page, if you would like to navigate to that page, you need to ensure that you separate the name of your REPL, which is your quote-unquote fully qualified domain name, right? This is going to point to your index.html, which is your home page, and you want to suffix that with the name of the page that you created in the directory that you created it in. In this case, we did not put the grid.html in a folder. It sits directly at the top level of the file structure for the website. So I don't need to say assets/dist to get to grid.html, because grid.html sits alongside all the other pages. So when I come in here, I can just say grid.html, /grid.html after the name of my REPL, which is my fully qualified domain name, and I should be able to get grid.html. And you can see here, this is my table. I'm a cell, I'm another cell, I'm a link. If I click I'm a link, it takes me back here. Now, obviously this is not what I want, and this is not really formatted in a way that I like, right? Tables are nice, especially tables that we use in HTML, but the problem that you're going to run into is they're very difficult and unwieldy to maintain and to use. So what we actually want is we want to make our tables not only easy to use and modify, where we can style them appropriately, but also responsive. The one problem you'll run into with HTML tables is that they're not very responsive. So if I came in here and inspected this page and I said, hey, you know what, I want this page to be of a browser type, you can see that didn't really change, right? This didn't format itself to the page itself. It didn't move or get smaller or bigger. It stayed the same size, same form factor. And if this was longer, it would word wrap and look really ugly. So in the case that we're looking at right here, we really don't want to use tables because they don't give us the responsiveness for viewports that we want for phones or tablets or smaller devices or even bigger devices. To get responsive design, and when I say the word responsive, I mean a design that works with multiple form factors and viewports. What I want to do is I want to use a paradigm like Bootstrap that forces us to use responsiveness. One way we can do that is by creating tables using CSS classes. How do I use this class? Well, first I need to have a div. Now, I'm going to stop and talk about what a div is. A div is shorthand for division, or a box, if you want to think about it that way. It is a box. That is all it is. But it is a very flexible box. It is very abstract. It can be whatever you want it to be. It doesn't necessarily have to be anything, and normally it doesn't really amount to much. One thing you will find about divs, though, are that divs cannot exist on the same line as another div unless the CSS specifically states that it should. All right? So if I have divs in a line, or if I want to have divs in a line, I need to ensure that I state that I want to have divs in a line in my CSS. Now, normally I would show you how to do that, but in this case I don't have to, because using Bootstrap, I can modify the order of my divs by adding CSS styles to do so. These CSS styles are Bootstrap derived, which means that Bootstrap, in its CSS style sheet, as you see up here in the min.css, allows us to use specific classes to do the things that I would normally have to write out verbosely using HTML CSS. So in this case, if I want my classes or my divs to be in line, I can say container. Now, what does container mean? Well, container is just a CSS class that is created within the Bootstrap hierarchy, right? That allows us to create tabular structure or a grid system, as Bootstrap states. When I say container, I can also format that and tell the container whether I want it left justified or right justified and how I want it to display. Now, the text specifically states in our documentation for Bootstrap itself that we should theoretically use text center, but text center literally centers the text. So I'm going to show you that in a second, but let's go a little deeper into how this works. So if I want to have a specific row, then I would need to create another div. And in that div, I would say, hey, I want a row. Just like in our table, right? If you rewind the video and look at the tabular structure, I did the same thing. I said I want a table, a container, and in that table I want t-head, t-body, and in t-body I want rows. And in those rows I want cells. Now, like I said, tables are very strict. They're very difficult to modify from a CSS perspective, and they ignore styles on a regular basis because they're very strictly typed. Divs are not strictly typed, and they give us the ability to do a lot of three-dimensional development. Now, right now it might not seem like we're doing that, but in certain respects you can quantify the z-index of a specific div to tell it where it would line up in the code or in the page, whether it will sit in front of something or behind it. You can tell it where to be in the page dynamically using a float or using, you know, CSS styles like top or bottom or left or right, and then giving it a relative location, and then responsive to the viewport, we can move the div wherever we want inside the page. But in this case, we're just going to stick to tabular two-dimensional structures so that you can see how this works. Because I want to get into why the div container row model in Bootstrap is highly advantageous. So now I'm going to create three divs, right? And I normally like to create them in advance. And then I'm going to give them classes. In this case, I'm going to give them a really simple class call. It's not a class that I use on a regular basis with Bootstrap because I like to define the responsiveness of the div. But right now we're just going to say call, which kind of limits how responsive the div is. Normally we'll say call small and then the number that we want, because the grid of the page is numerically tied to boxes as you count across in the page. And I'm going to show you that in a second. But for now, let's just do this. We'll say column. We're going to match the documentation. And I'm going to save that, and I'm going to go here and I'm going to refresh this page. And now you can see that everything moved. Notice everything moved. It's not on the left hand side, it's on the right hand side. Or it's not on the left hand side or the right hand side. It's kind of almost right justified based on where it is. If I gave these borders or even background images, or background color, I can say BG light. BG light means background light. And what it'll do is it'll make the background of each of these divs gray, a very light gray. F8, F8, F8 is the, or F8, 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 F8 is the one of the styles for this run. Nope, don't do that. And then come here, and there you can see the gray, 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 gray. And you can see how this actual column, maybe if I make it a little more evident, worn. Worn is a nice warm yellow. Or is it danger? I know danger is red, so we'll say danger. So you can see the background a little better. There we go. Red, red, red. So you can see the container is already formatted where the two sides on the ends are of the equal size. If I come in here and look at it, you can see how each end is an equal side to the other side, and it kind of gives you that border that most websites have and that you're looking for. But one more problem that we're running into is that these are all left justified. So if I came in and I did exactly what documentation told me to do, and I said text center, what text center will do is it will apply centering to all of its child divs. It's a very powerful way of doing this. So if I come in here and I do refresh, you can see how all the divs that are children or that sit inside that container div, they all now have text center applied to them. And if I looked at the document or the code behind for each of those, you can see how there's BG danger, there's Cole, and let me see if it'll show me text center. There it is, text center. And I put text center in the parent div, and therefore it was inherited by all the other children or the other child divs. And this is in a nutshell how it really works. Now, there's something I want to show you to give you more context, and that's the way that the grid options work with respect to form factors. So if I go back over to the documentation, normally a lot of web developers either use mid or large to really quantify the max width of the container that they want to display. So if I came in here and I said, well, you know, as you see here, they have it all parsed out. If you did, and remember I said it's responsive. So if you only put 2 calls in there, it would actually give it 50% for each of those divs. Put 3, it'll give it 33%. But you can also call out how big you want things to be by telling it, giving it a number on the end. Now, here's what's nice about that. Understand that the number on the end can only add up to 12. So if, and this may have changed, but when we come in here, if I had said this is a call 6 instead of a call or call nothing, what'll happen, let me switch over so you can see what I just did. Call 6, I changed the first div to call 6. This should be 50% of the page, and these two should be 25% each. So if I come back over here, you can see how this now became 50% of the actual row, right? That's 50% of the row, and these are 25% of the row. You see right there, actually, I just showed you where it is, right here. The call 6 made it 50%. If I said call 12, that would be the whole line. This whole line adds up to 12 blocks. So if you wanted to do responsive design using call medium 6, call large 6, the form factor would apply to max width 996 pixels or 762 pixels based on the variability of how we want those to work. Now, responsive design allows us to use those numbers in a way that give us percentages of our boxes rather than, hey, I want you to be a fixed size. And that's very important because if the viewport changes, if you have a mobile device versus a desktop device, you want that device to be able to render the size of the divs the way that you would like them to render and to not make it look ugly. So if I remember what I did with the table, the form didn't really change. It looked the same size, and it could get, become an issue later on down the road. If I turn this into a into a mobile design, look at this. It is still 50%. This is still 50%, and that's still 25%. it responsively shrunk itself based on the form factor that I was trying to make it shrink to. And this is the nuts, this is the pièce de résistance of how we will want to use our grid systems in Bootstrap. I implore you to use grid systems to great effect in the assignments in this class and get used to using grid systems as we move forward. Well, if you want to learn more about grid systems, it just takes a little more reading on the documentation to give you more context. And I would say, please go in and give it a go. Try to find out more about what you don't know and try out things that give you an idea of what to look for. I don't want to waste any more of your time really running my mouth. I really want you to get in and get your hands dirty. So, as I say in all my classes, good luck, have fun.